Hello and welcome to Shaka Extra Time. I am Paul Ndiho, and joining me in studio live is Shaka Sali himself, aka the Kabale Kid. Hello Shaka,
Hello,
welcome
Paul.
back from Africa.
Well, thank you very much, and of course it's a great pleasure to be with you here in Studio 47 since July 17th. You remember?
The feeling is mutual. Let's go to our studio audience, rather our Facebook audience are watching us live from all over the world. Shaka Extra Time is a place where you get to talk to Shaka himself, aka the Kabale Kid. And today, basically, we're going to talk about a recap of our trip to Africa. Both of us just came back, and this is the first time we're actually interacting here in a studio. So, Shaka, bring us up to speed. How was your trip like? What did you like? What did you not like?
Incredible. First of all, of course, you know as well as I do that we had the opportunity to participate in a historic election in Zimbabwe, an election that seemed to be going on very well until, of course, the Wednesday of August 1st.
What do you mean by historic? A lot of people that I've talked to, a lot of people who have been analyzing that election seems to think that it's not as historic as we thought maybe.
It depends, of course, what you mean by historic or what you don't.
That it reminds them of what has been happening previously.
Not really, because I think that I think what I saw in being in the Zimbabwean capital Harare, first of all, was that at least there was some semblance of openness. You did have people with different points of views having the opportunity to sell their message, or at least in terms of meeting people and conversing and what have you, but certainly not through the television platform, which of course is ZBC, and that seemed to be very partisan. But the fact that people were able to talk and people were able at least to be seen to have a right to own a different opinion, to me, I think in the context of the politics of Zimbabwe, I thought this really was historic. The only problem, again, as I say, was Wednesday, August 1st, when the results, started, coming out, and supporters of the opposition MDC, presidential candidate Nelson Chamiza, kind of like, disagreed with what they were hearing and all that kind of stuff, because they thought that the results should have been favorable to them. And of course, the manner in which the state institutions reacted. I'm talking about the security institutions. In this particular case, frankly, they proved to be institutions of violence.
Shaka, you had an opportunity to moderate, to be a co-moderator on one of the presidential debates they had there. If you were to compare and contrast with the one that you did in Uganda, what was your takeaway from the debate you hosted in Zimbabwe?
First of all, these were two totally different types of debates, if you will, in the sense that the one in Uganda had been organized by the Inter-Religious Council. And therefore, they had the last word on what the modalities would be, on what the regulations, the rules of the game were. Whereas, on the other hand, in Zimbabwe, it was a debate supposed to be at least organized by the Zim Papers television network, of course, in cooperation with the Voice of America. So in this particular case, for example, there was not even an attempt, in fact, to frame questions, quote unquote, as it were, even though the people who wrote the script somehow inserted the questions there. And what my colleague and I decided to do was that we had to go rogue. We had to ignore the questions and actually do it as we go. And that's exactly what we did. The other thing, of course, is that unlike the Ugandan case, where you did have several, presidential candidates, including the incumbent president himself, Yoweri Museveni. In this particular case in Harare, you did not have incumbent president Emerson Munagangwa, nor did you, in fact, even have the main opposition leader, Nelson Chamiza, even though these two were represented by some people that they felt very comfortable with.
How about on election day? You had an opportunity to go around to talk to people. What struck you?
What struck me was, remember we went to a place which is a suburb, yeah, downtown. And I remember that we were, for example, in fact, sort of monitoring, you know, a friend really, and somebody that has really made a name in being a political activist in Zimbabwe and indeed in Africa. We're talking about Dr. Ibo Mandaza, a man who taught at the University College Dar es Salaam, when Dar es Salaam was still part of the University of East Africa. A man, of course, really who calls a spade a spade. I mean, if you think in terms of the shortest distance between 2 points, for Ibo Mandaza, it is a straight line, not a detour. So we were able to accompany him to the polling station, and because he was considered to be an elder, if you were above 60 or 65, you were given an opportunity to go ahead and vote, at least earlier than the young people who are very strong, energetic and stuff like that. So I liked that. And really everything seemed to be orderly. Everybody seemed to be voting the way they wanted and what have you. So I didn't really see a lot of complaint in terms of voting, with the exception of a few cases where some individuals did not find their names on the voter register and therefore had really problems to cast their vote. But I think that everything seemed to be going really smoothly, even, you know, considering the reports that we were receiving from the rural communities of Zimbabwe and what have you, because we never had a chance really to go out of the capital. The problem was Wednesday, August the 1st, the very day that you were leaving me in Harare. I remember accompanying you to the airport, the Robert Mugabe International Airport. And I didn't like the fact that the state really deployed...
unleashed terror on its people.
Deployed the military, the army. There was a police. They could have used, for example, they had a choice. They could have used water cannon. They could have used tear gas, so a combination of both. But certainly not an army with live ammunition. This was the problem.
Shaka, does that remind you of some countries where the state unleashes terror? For example, you've seen that happen in some countries in the eastern part of Africa. But even maybe to, for me, what I saw that day didn't look as a regime that had won a legitimate election. It looked like some people who were trying to make up facts. Is that something that you maybe share?
I think that what I could probably say is that it seemed to me that the regime was in panic mode. It was in panic mode. I don't know why. I don't know whether they had some kind of contingency arrangements for maybe for doing what some would characterize as creative accounting. I don't know really what their scheme was, but I didn't like the fact that they essentially deployed the military. And as someone who has been in the military at one point, I know that the military is supposed to be in the business of defending a country. They're supposed to be engaging the enemies of the state. And if they're in the business of engaging the enemies of state, of course, they are allowed to use live ammunition. Someone said, why didn't they probably actually have rubber bullets? The military never gets into the business of rubber bullets. That should be something for the police. But in this particular case too, frankly, they could have used the training type of ammunition, which is called blanks. They could have used blanks. Or they could in fact have shot in the air. I don't know why they shot at people, to the extent that several people actually reportedly died. And I was also told by some doctors that there were in fact very many people who were injured and were in hospitals.
Shaka, from Zimbabwe you proceeded on to Malawi. Maybe help us, bring us up to date. What did you do in Malawi? I saw pictures of you meeting some journalists, the former president, Bakili Muluzi, the former hostess to the president, Kamuzu Banda, then the former vice president. Maybe bring us up to speed.
Well, first of all, to be very honest with you, it was a very huge break from Zimbabwe to the Republic of Malawi, which of course is, you know, neighboring Malawi. We flew from, of course, Robert Gabriel Mugabe International Airport in Harare to Lilongwe via Lusaka. So we landed actually in Lusaka at the Dr. Kenneth David Kaunda International Airport, where we spent like an hour, and then some people got off and others came on board, and then we flew to the international airport in Lilongwe, which is so-called Kamuzu International Airport. Of course, in tribute to the founding president of the Republic of Malawi, Dr. Hastings Kamuzu Banda, someone I admired so much. I remember I was in Kigezi High School primary, really, and looking at Drum magazine, which to me was like the Bible. And I used to look at the picture of Dr. Hastings Kamuzu Banda, and a man, you know, who was a distinguished physician, had spent many, many years in the United States, and later in the United Kingdom, alongside other dignitaries, and obviously people that are very, very important in the history of Africa, people like the Osajefo, the Ghanaian founding president, Prime Minister and President, Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, people like Kenyan founding president, Jomo Kenyatta, people like Leopold Sédar Senghor of Senegal, a lot of people like the Caribbean American George Padmore, a man that has obviously in many, many ways inspired me as a journalist, really, and a scholar. People like Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois, a man who also inspired me in some ways as an intellectual. These are people who were Pan-Africanists, people who basically stood very firmly, very critical of colonialism and imperialism, very critical of racism, as it were in those days, especially following the end of the Second World War. So I was looking at Malawi in the eyes of one of these sons of Africa, a man, of course, that was very, very much criticized for the manner in which he embarked upon what others would characterize as constructive engagement of apartheid South Africa. He actually opened even diplomatic relations with South Africa, and saying, his argument was that you really need to change the way they do business in South Africa, but in order for you to do that, you need to be able to engage them. But most of his brothers and cousins and what have you were obviously on a totally different page. But I was lucky to meet his friend Cecilia Casamira, who happened to be the presidential official hostess. I was remarkably impressed by the manner that, for example, she actually shared with me the fact that one of her role models was Eleanor Roosevelt.
Interesting.
Eleanor Roosevelt, the wife of FDR.
Interesting. Before we maybe move on, you talked about your admiration for Kamuzu Banda, but there are a lot of critics there who say, wait a minute, Shaka, this guy was not a true Democrat like you've described him. This guy was actually a dictator.
By the way, there are probably not many people that will tell you that the Osajefo, Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, was a Democrat. But they will tell you that the man was very, very clear about the struggle against colonialism, the struggle against imperialism. He's probably, and obviously...
But those two cannot be placed in the same...
It doesn't matter. The fact of the matter is, when you look at Kwame Nkrumah, for example, he was probably the most visionary leader that Africa has yet had. When you think about the man who actually guided what was the Gold Coast to regain its political independence on March 6, 1957. And among other things, when he actually speaks, releases his statement, he talks about how the independence of Ghana would be meaningless unless it was linked with the total liberation of Africa. And he did not simply talk the talk, by the way, Paul. He actually found time to walk that particular talk by providing the necessary tools, the necessary support, of his fellow Africans who lived in so many different countries that were still under the colonial yoke. Yes, he was a Pan-Africanist. He was an African. He was a man who did not have borders and boundaries in his mind as far as Africa was concerned. He was a man who came from Krofu, where I have had the opportunity to go and meet his relatives and stuff like that with his only daughter, Samia Nkrumah. It is a very, very remote place, almost bordering with, in fact, what is called Ivory Coast. But then you talk with some other Ghanaians, and they will tell you.
I want you to talk about Kamuzu Banda.
Yeah, but I'm telling you about his role in being part of the Pan-Africanists in Britain, for example. He was alongside people like Kwame Nkrumah, Jomo Kenyatta, George Padmore, Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois, Paul Robeson, all those giants that have actually brought about change in terms of racial interaction between people who look like you and people who trace their ancestry from Europe and North America, for that matter. When I was admiring Dr. Hastings Kamuzu Banda, mind you, I was in a primary school, and I was looking at him in a magazine called Drum Magazine, which I told you was like my Bible. And as far as I was concerned at that time, what I read in print was tantamount to being gospel. I did not have the analytical type of mind that I acquired or attained later in my life. So I think I have a right to admire somebody, and just like I admired people like John Wayne, I admired Gene Autry, I admired Clint Eastwood, and later at UCLA, I admired Richard Roundtree, Shaft in Africa. You know, so there's so many things you can admire. People admire Jesus Christ; they have never even met him.
That's a good segue. You are watching Shaka Extra Time, a show that comes to you every Tuesday here at the Voice of America on Facebook Live. Shaka, before we go to the comments, maybe let's start in Uganda. There are some interesting political developments happening in Uganda. You and I happen to come from Uganda. Would you care to comment about the arrest and the killing of the driver of Honorable MP Robert Chagulanyi?
You know, I have never had a doubt that Uganda happens to be one of those countries in Africa, and indeed in the world, that happen to be democratically challenged. You have a by-election in Arua, northwestern Uganda. You had a man called Abiriga, arguably someone that was very popular, very liked across the board, because I remember when he died under very weird circumstances, really. I remember that even the members of the Ugandan opposition were very sad, sincerely, to see this man die, because they said this was a man, at least, who knew what he wanted, whether you agreed with him or you didn't. You didn't have to worry about where he stood. You saw it very clearly. And this was a by-election for replacing Mr. Biriga. So I have a feeling that if you are going to play the democratic card or democratic ball, you're going at least to allow a semblance of people to have a right to own an opinion, even though it may in fact be sharply in contrast with yours. Now, I'm told that Bobi Wine happened to be in Arua at the same time when Ugandan President Yoweri Museveni was also in town, campaigning for, obviously, a candidate that supports the ruling party. And I am told that it looked like, of course, the people of the opposition were winning.
The press secretary, there is a lot of controversy surrounding that. That could have been the result as to why maybe the army targeted Bobi Wine.
Do you know that it is the army for sure?
I have no idea. That's why I say there's a lot of controversy surrounding it.
Well, we don't know exactly who were behind this shooting, but there are people who say that a lot of indications suggest that these were probably agents of the state. And of course, the state has also said these were probably quote-unquote hooligans who were supporting Bobby Wine and his people and all that kind of stuff. I think it is very unfortunate, frankly, that somebody tried to, damage the presidential limousine and whatever you. But let's face it, this is a vehicle. A vehicle can be repaired. A vehicle cannot be equated with a life of a human being.
But this is not an ordinary vehicle, it's the president's vehicle, Shaka.
That's
if
true.
anybody did it,
I'm saying it is very unfortunate, but at the same time, a vehicle can be repaired. I'm talking about a person who actually died. Can you bring back the person who died? I was told one day by a friend who happened to be a president of Ghana, Flight Lieutenant Jerry John Rawlings, retired but certainly not tired. I remember he said, when they started killing some people who, in their view, had actually problems to of Ghana, he was also that those things did not last, or the peace did not really become a reality, is because both principals complained that the peace agreement was actually forced or imposed upon them. Now, this time around, I don't know, because, again, it seems to me that it's quite possible, again, when you look at the circumstances, that this was not an initiative coming from those two individuals. It seems to me it was IGAD and the IGAD Plus, made up of the Troika. You're talking about Norway, United Kingdom, and United States. So I really don't know. At the end of the day, it is up to the South Sudanese themselves to find some space in their beautiful South Sudanese hearts to accept the fact that they don't really have to love one another, that they are in fact either condemned or they have an opportunity to live in the same territory. And therefore, they should be able to figure out a way of making sure that they can share the air in that particular space. Because unless they do that, they are basically condemning not only themselves, but even their children and their children's real future. Because let's face it, South Sudan is an incredibly huge, wealthy country, to the extent that there are very few people, by the way, and yet they have spent unnecessary times really trying to kill the few that they need to develop that territory. In fact, South Sudan should be an answer to immigration. When you look at Africans who are trying to cross the Mediterranean to go to Europe for greener pastures or crossing the Atlantic and all that kind of stuff, they could actually go to South Sudan so that together they can help develop that part of the world. That is a country, for example, which is hugely fertile, Paul. I've had the opportunity to fly over that country, not once, not twice, 3 times. And frankly, it is virgin terrain. It could be a bread basket, for example, of Africa and the Middle East. Then they have the oil, the black gold to boot. They have other precious minerals and kind of stuff. So these people need to figure out a way of trying to return to normalcy. But you have to also give them the benefit of the doubt, because since 1956, these people have never really seen peace.
Let's, while we're away, other interesting developments happened in the Congo. President Joseph Kabila said he's not going to be on the ballot. For the first time, an African dictator is trying to maybe give way for other leaders maybe to come in. Your thoughts? Maybe let me follow up with also a comment from David Osirio Monda in New York, who said, are you surprised that Kabila is not running for office again? Like his critics say, he will simply rule through proxy. Your thoughts?
Well, first of all, let's face it, I'm glad that he had previously said he was not going to run, and people had said they did not believe him, that he will probably figure out a way of shifting the political, constitutional goalposts so that he can remain the only constant in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. So I'm glad that he has made a decision. He's not going to run. Now, people who say he'll control, from behind and what have you, I don't know. The only person probably who has been able to accomplish that in my lifetime is Tanzania's or Tanganyika founding leader, Mwalimu Julius Kambarage Nyerere. When he stepped aside in 1985, he was able, for example, to anoint Ali Hassan Mwinyi, and he was able to do that. But people like Chiruba tried to do that to Mwanawasa. It didn't work.
Very briefly, Shaka, what are you talking about tomorrow on Straight Talk Africa?
Tomorrow it is very interesting because, in fact, I am not hosting tomorrow's Straight Talk Africa edition. I am going to be a guest along with Paul Ndiho himself, and we are going to be walking our audience through the trip that we had in Zimbabwe, and of course, in my particular case, I also add my experiences in Malawi. So that is exactly what's going to be happening. Tomorrow we'll be weighing in on our experiences and what we saw, whether it works or it doesn't work for Africa.
We have like 30 seconds. Do you think having borders really helps Africa?
Well, one of the things that I have often said that we do not need these colonial imposed boundaries because they are actually very artificial and they are not really to our benefit. They are for the benefit of the people who imposed them upon us. I think it is high time we remove these borders and become the Africa that we want.
Well, on that note, thank you so much, Shaka. We look forward to another edition of Shaka Extra Time next week on Tuesday. But in the meantime, you can stay tuned for our show tomorrow, Straight Talk. I will be talking about a recap of our trip to Africa. Until then, thank you so much from Washington.
You're most welcome.
Yeah, thank you.